everybody, welcome back to Concierge Confidential. I'm your host, Brian Ortega, and on this episode, we're going to be talking about local versus strip hotels. So in this episode, we're going to talk about what are the benefits of staying on the strip or staying a little off the strip at what we call local properties. So I'll be going over kind of what the difference is between the two properties and why each one has benefits and also setbacks if you choose to stay at those properties. So we're going to be diving into local versus strip hotels coming up next. Okay, everybody, so let's go ahead and dive into local versus the strip. So when we're talking about local versus the strip, we're actually lumping in the strip of being Las Vegas Boulevard and Fremont Street. So they are two not entirely different places, but they have more in common than, say, a local property. So local properties you can tend to find around the Las Vegas Strip, usually about 5 to 10 miles from Las Vegas Boulevard. Some can be as close as, like, say, the Palms or Palace Station, which are actually close by the Strip, but count as local casinos. So those hotels definitely will be lumped in as, like, a local property. Back in the day, the Palms used to be a strip-style property, which it still is, but it tends to favor a lot more local sort of needs, if you will. So we'll kind of go through and explain sort of the differences. So first of all, let's start with the Strip. So the Strip is going to be the closest spot or the closest area to the airport. So the biggest thing that the Strip and local casinos have in difference is obviously the size of their properties and pricing, of course. The budgeting is always going to be different for a local casino and the strip property. So let's actually start this way. So I'm actually going to start by talking about local casinos in general and what they have inside of them that differ from strip properties. So local properties tend to be favored towards, obviously, people who live in Las Vegas. So you usually find lower limit tables. You usually find less hotel rooms just because most people are not staying at that property. They're there for really, a couple of hours and then they go home. Not to say that you can't stay at these properties because they do have hotel rooms. And some of these rooms are actually beautiful rooms to stay at, especially places like Red Rock Canyon. Red Rock Canyon. You also, I keep saying Red Rock Canyon, Red Rock Resort. And then you also have Durango, which is a new property, which has beautiful rooms. So local casinos tend to favor, of course, locals and their needs of gambling. So you typically find lower limited tables. So what does that mean? So gone are the days that you can find $3 tables. That's like an old thing. Even $5 tables are really hard to find most places. So most local offerings are going to give you $10 or $15 minimum tables, and that's hard to find 10, but you can for sure find 15. You also usually find a little bit more favorable gaming rules. For example, you'll find a lot of 3-2 blackjack. You'll usually never find 6-5 blackjack off of the strip, just because locals tend to know the difference between that as well. But a good example of this is places like South Point, which is on Las Vegas Boulevard. If you go super far south, they actually have a lot of $5 blackjack tables and craps as well. Usually find also really affordable slot machines, although this is sort of like a misnomer, just because typically you can find slots that are going to be similar in price, like Crazy Rich Asians is always a good example that I use, that their minimums tend to be very similar to what you find on the strip, which is, well, when I say minimums, I mean the max. So, because my mom likes to play the max. So typically they have $5 and $10 minimums are going to be the max bet, just depending on where you go. So you just have to keep an eye on that. But typically, budgeting is the biggest difference between local and strip properties. Local casinos also tend to have a much more diverse number of offerings in terms of things inside of their facilities. So you'll obviously find a casino. You'll find the hotel part of it as well. They obviously have a sports book. That's usually a big deal. Locals or local casinos that have been here for quite a while. The sports book used to be a really important part of the architecture of a hotel. Now that we have, mobile gaming and all that good stuff, it's not as important. But it was really the place where locals you'd have to drive from one sports book to another sports book to another sports book because there wasn't like a centralized place to see what the lines were doing. So you would, be at one place, you'd call your friend who was at another spot, and then they'd have to drive over there to actually get that particular bet in. So you usually find pretty good sports books at local casinos because that's sort of like our sports bars. We do have sports bars in the valley, but not every sports bar allows you to gamble. So a lot of these local casinos have really, really good sports books. So I was actually just at Green Valley Ranch, and I usually don't think anything of it because I don't hang in the sports book all day. I usually go in, make my bets, and then roll out. But my dad was actually visiting, who loves the South Point sports book. That's his favorite sports book in all of Las Vegas. Is it anything special? Kind of not really, but it has two different sides. So one side is sports, the other side is horse racing. So one day he decided that he wanted to change it up, and he actually ended up going to the Green Valley Ranch Sportsbook, and really nice on the inside. Lots of TVs, which is very important. Good bar. It's actually like a circular bar, which is nice that it sort of sits as an area where that you can sit, watch the games, and also have a cocktail. It's dark. It feels very cool, especially in the summertime. That's a really, really big deal. And he's able to walk in and do sports betting and horse betting in the same place, which is sometimes cool and sometimes kind of difficult depending on what you're there for. But really works out for my dad because he was doing both, so that was actually very, very helpful. So local places tend to have really, really good offerings in terms of non-gaming spaces. So I know that I used the sportsbook as an example, but it's kind of funny in Las Vegas that you typically find a lot of local casinos are also where we find our bowling alleys and our movie theaters. So it's very rare to find a spot in Las Vegas that has a movie theater that's not connected to a casino. There are a few. Me being a movie person, I love going to the movies, and we do have a couple IMAXs in Las Vegas, but really the one that I always recommend people to go to is the one at Town Square, which is not in a casino at all. And that's the one where I go see all the big movies, the big premieres. That's where I go watch my movies at the IMAX theaters. But if it doesn't need to be an IMAX, I will go to the one at South Point. Their Cinemark brand, which is across the country, but that's the brand that we have here. They typically have a lot of those. So typically, a lot of local casinos have a movie theater in it. The only one that really doesn't, that's been built that was new, is the Durango Hotel. So Durango itself, I think, is going to build on or add on to its property. But I understand the reasoning of not having a movie theater, that they really want to cater towards sort of like those well-done millennials and also people who are in like that Gen X sort of range, who like to gamble, but also that the millennials that want to hang out, have a cool spot to hang, and then not have a lot of kids around, because that's typically Durango. Durango does not have a lot of offerings for children, but they also don't have a movie theater. They don't have a bowling alley. They also don't have, I don't think they have bingo either, which is a huge deal. But anyways, local casinos are actually really good, other than Durango, if you have children, just because you do have lots of options for them to do things while you want to gamble or go to the spa. They usually have lots of offerings. For example, like a theater, like a movie theater, a bowling alley, and then, of course, some places actually have pretty large arcades. Really good examples are Green Valley Ranch, Sunset Station. You can also go to Red Rock Resort, which actually has an arcade, and they also have a daycare, somewhat of a daycare. They're very strict about, who goes in, just because you do have to have like all your medical records and such. So for those of you listening that have kids and you're wondering, hey, like I want to have a couple hours to myself, where can I, leave my kids in sort of like a responsible area that isn't like a nanny, or you can order a nanny also, but usually, if you wanted to, you can go over to Red Rock and you can actually take your kids to their daycare area, which my brother's actually done that a couple times, and he said it actually is a pretty good experience, all things considered. I would say that it's, not bad. But local casinos tend to offer really good things for kids. They're usually next to other places that offer things that you can do as a family. For example, you can go to Red Rock Resort, and they also have, it's really right next to downtown Summerlin, which is an outdoor shopping mall, shopping center that they have lots of restaurants. They also have a Dave and Buster's, which is like a huge deal, a movie theater. They have 2 movie theaters in the same place. It's crazy. Then they also have the Las Vegas ballpark. So if they have a game going on or whatever, you can actually go over to the Las Vegas ballpark. So that's great. You also have Green Valley Ranch, which has the district, which has a bunch of restaurants and shopping areas that you can take kids to, and obviously offers a lot of restaurant options. So that's a really big deal, is all the diverse offerings that they have at local places. So we've talked about the budget, talked about the diverse offerings. Typically, room rates tend to be a little bit more approachable. Really, it just depends where you go. You can find room rates as low as like $40. I've even seen them lower, but usually you can find them for like 40. And if you go to nicer places like, say, Red Rock or Durango, you're probably going to be looking in like the 150, sometimes up to the 275 range, and that's only on like busy holidays. 4th of July, all that stuff. 4th of July is probably the busiest. It's one of the busiest days of the year in terms of room rates for the entire valley, but specifically for local casinos, because in local casinos, that's where we have a lot of our fireworks. So typically, they will always have fireworks for 4th of July. Sometimes they'll change the date. It'll be like the 3rd or it'll be the 4th, just depends. But they typically have a higher room charge because that is a place that you want to stay, watch the fireworks, and go on. Similar for New Year's Eve. It's a very similar process because of that. So typically, room rates tend to be a little bit more budget-friendly than Strip properties. They typically have resort fees, but the resort fees are very, very low, if any. So it just depends on which casino you go to. They will sometimes have resort fees, but that's more of like the Strip kind of a thing. So moving on. There is more sense of a community, so you find that the casino is a good sort of meeting spot for a lot of locals and a lot of people who are retired. That ends up being where they go hang out. Sometimes they'll just go drink at the bar there because they do have beautiful bars. Like Durango has a beautiful bar in their sports book. So a lot of people will just hang and just sort of relax. So the funny thing is that I came up with this idea for this particular podcast because I actually do not like hanging out at local bars because there's such a sense of community. Just because I really enjoy meeting new and interesting people that have unique stories. And the thing is that Vegas has very interesting stories, but they're kind of all the same, especially when you talk to a lot of other Las Vegas locals. A lot of people are talking about working on the Strip and how nobody tips anymore. They're talking about how mean the guests are. And it's kind of all the same story. And you've heard it once. You've kind of heard it a million times. So it's just weird. I don't find myself gravitating towards bars on the Strip. Also, typically people like to go to bars that have, a large group of friends that like to hang out there. And all my friends work different shifts than me. So it's actually hard to sort of get together and meet a lot of times. So you tend to get a lot more groups at local bars or people who are just there to gamble as well. So that's why I do enjoy going to the Strip, is because you find a lot of people who are also visiting. They may not be here with, their family or their loved ones. So it's kind of a fun place to sort of hear unique stories from people from around the country and sometimes around the world is really fantastic. I would recommend local local places for people who want to be with a bunch of people. So another one, free parking. That's always very popular. Local casinos tend not to charge for parking, even for valet. It's usually complimentary. This is really helpful, especially if you're driving from like a neighboring state like Arizona, California. If you're somebody that doesn't bring their car to Las Vegas, I do not recommend stay at a local property, because the whole reason that you're staying at a local property is you have the flexibility of going to and from wherever you want. Or you just plan on not leaving the property, which, I mean, if you've ever been in a casino in Las Vegas, you've wanted to leave the property at some point. So I recommend, if you stay at a local casino, build into your budget that you are going to have a car for at some point. At least rent it for a day or two. Or you're going to charge a lot for Uber rides, just because you're going to want to go to and from. Because the only thing about local casinos that is really a disadvantage is the isolation of that property. That property is meant to be sort of like the community center for that particular community, and everybody has different communities. And some of these, the most prevalent one would be Stations Casinos. They own many, many casinos in the valley, so they don't want to put them too close together. They sort of want this perfect sort of reach to all the communities. So you're not able to get to the other one, super easily. You're going to need a car to do that. Or if you want to go to the Strip or, Grand Canyon or whatever, you're going to have to get in a car to do that. So the other thing, probably the last thing I'll probably talk about local casinos and why people love them. Free shows. They do have, concerts, like LL Cool J is going to the M Resort, which is coming up in September, which is really cool. And you'd also get a lot of country performers at these local places as well. But you do find a lot of free shows, which is really, really nice. If you go to places like South Point, places like resort. Oh my goodness, I keep want to say Resorts World, Red Rock. You tend to find a lot of these like free shows in the lounges, which is really, really great. You can walk in, hang out. Sometimes there's a fee. It's usually very low. Like it's sometimes $10-15 to go see a show. I remember at South Point, they still do it, but they've actually had to move it to the to a different part of the hotel because it was too open. Was the Dirty at 12:30, which was it's a wonderful concept. It's a 12:30 show at nighttime, so 12:30 midnight, and they would do X-rated or R-rated comedy. Dirty comedy, in the lounge, and it was free. It was free to go in. You could watch it whenever when they had the show. It was usually on Fridays, and it was a great, great concept. They still have it. It's just moved over to their little like showroom that actually is like walled in, and I don't know if they still charge for it or if they started charging for it, but the shows themselves are very affordable. You can find tickets for like 25, 30. If it's a really good show, like $60, but really a far cry from what you're paying for shows on the Las Vegas Strip. But local casinos are good for people who do not want to move very often. They're there to gamble. That's really all they want to do. Typically, they have really good pools. They're really approachable as well. If you are a local, a lot of pools will let you, like for example, the M Resort, let you go into their pool for a fee, which is really nice because on the Strip, you used to be able to kind of do that. Not really like that anymore. They want you to be staying on property to be able to utilize those areas of the hotel. Also, restaurants. I didn't mention this, but restaurants, you tend to get a good little mix. You usually have like a nice steakhouse. You usually have a cafe, which I love. Sometimes they'll have a buffet like South Point. A lot of them got rid of their buffets as well, just sort of one of those things. But you typically have one really good restaurant on property and then a bunch of sort of like middling or mediocre restaurants sort of mixed in there. It's nice though because I do like cafes. They will usually have a 24-hour cafe on hand at every single local spot just because it's sort of a standard that we would hope for Las Vegas. What's really cool, like for South Point, they do have their midnight menu, which you can get a steak and eggs for like $5, which people swear by. So people love it. I believe it's only available after 12 o'clock midnight. So keep that in mind if you're going to be coming and you want to stay at a local place. So that's that. So that's our local part of this particular pod. We're going to be flipping to the Strip side of this when we come back from the break, and I'll go over some of the better the things that I like about the Strip and some of its setbacks as well. And that'll be coming up next. Okay, everybody, so we are back. So let's go ahead and talk about the Strip. So the Strip itself is Las Vegas Boulevard, usually about 4.6 miles. Again, tour guide. But this is 4.5 miles right off of where the airport comes from, which is the first reason that people like the Strip is because it's highly accessible via Uber, Lyft, taxi, bus, private car, whichever you'd like. And once you actually take that private car or take that Uber from the airport to the Strip, which I highly recommend that, do not walk. After that, you can walk in between many of these properties. So common misconception is that you can walk up and down the Strip and it's no big deal. That's somewhat true, but there is quite a long walk, even though it's only 4.6 miles. It is quite a long walk from property to property. So a really good example of that is like if you're walking from, let's just say, Caesar's Palace to the Venetian. You think that's actually close, but you actually have to cross like the Mirage, then you have to cross over, and it really depends on which part of the hotel you're coming out from. You can even look at, like, let's just say Bellagio. You say, oh, well, I'm trying to get over to the Venetian from the Bellagio. And when you start walking, you're like, oh, it's only Caesar's Palace. Caesar's Palace has over 4,000 rooms inside of it. So to actually get past all that crazy property, all the weird stuff in front of it, then you have to pass in front of the Mirage, and then the, Harrah's, and then you get to the Venetian. So by the time you've done all that, you've had a pretty full day of walking. So some things are walkable and very accessible. So, for example, things like Cosmopolitan, Bellagio, Aria, those actually are all very accessible walking-wise. They're pretty close. They're newly built, so they typically have bridges that connect each other. There's even a secret back bridge that connects Bellagio to Cosmopolitan now that you can now connect to the Vdara. So it's doable. So things are doable here, but there are long stretches that walking is sometimes not what I would recommend. Like, for example, I would never walk from the Mandalay Bay all the way to, say, Fontainebleau. That is an extremely long walk. You're going to want to stop and look at things, and by the time you've done it, you've spent, 3 hours walking up and down the Strip. How long would it take me to do it? Because I'm a pretty fast walker, and I've lived here for quite a long time, and I've walked up and down the Strip and know kind of a lot of the shortcuts. I think I could do it in like an hour 15. I think I could. Obviously, that means no stopping. You're just walking straight through the entire time. And honestly, if I did that, I think I can do it in 45 minutes. But again, it does still take time, and I kind of know where I'm going. So I don't recommend you do that. But other than that, being close to the airport and all that good stuff, that's one reason to do it. It's highly accessible. You can walk in between all these properties. Ladies, if you are wearing heels, I do not recommend walking more than one hotel over. Even in walking through a hotel can sometimes be, major torture on your feet. I actually took somebody on a date, and all we did was walk from the parking garage to Mayfair Supper Club, around the outside to the Bellagio fountains in front, and then back through, in front of the Bellagio fountains, back to the parking garage. And that was almost too much for the person that I was with. So it's really, really important that you know your limits in terms of walking in heels on the Strip. So let's move to the other things. So the big thing that I usually recommend that you see the biggest differences is the quality of the interiors and the quality of the hotels in general. Typically, when you are paying for a Strip hotel, you are paying usually a minimum between $250 to upwards of, $800 to $1,000 a night in a room. Obviously, we have rooms that are more expensive than that, but I'm just trying to prove a point. So typically, with that, you are expecting a certain level of class or a certain level of quality inside of those properties. So usually, like if you walk into, let's just say the Aria feels like a Strip property. It's very sleek. It's very modern. They have these big, giant, spaces like their main lobby that has this beautiful, airy space that has all of this, artwork that's draping off the top. It actually has set pieces in the middle of their open concept. And that's what you're paying for. You're paying for the sleekness, the modernness to it. If you go to places like the Wynn or the Encore, you're paying for the plush, elegance of that property. So you really see where your money is going once you walk into these properties. We actually have this thing in the hotel business called the wow factor. The first thing that you see when you walk into a hotel should be the lobby. And once you walk into that lobby, you should be taken aback. You should say, wow, this is why I wanted to stay here. This is Vegas, baby. So that is really what you are paying for. You're paying for that experience to sort of just be wowed. I think the Fontainebleau has kind of an interesting setup because when you walk into their main lobby, it kind of feels like the Pan Am sort of terminal in New York, where it's just sort of this big white space with these big giant columns. And what really sets it apart, which has really become a signature of the property, is their big giant vases or this big giant sort of space in the middle filled with roses and purple orchids and just beautiful flowers, which hopefully they keep that going because people absolutely love it. People love that space, which is very expensive to have all that, but people really do love it. People take pictures in front of it. It's become a mainstay of that part of the property. So that's important. So that's what you're paying for. Like when you go pay to stay at the Fontainebleau, you smell the roses, and it just feels like, hey, this is the Strip. That is what I wanted. That's what you're getting. So higher quality of the interiors. So that goes for the casino. It also goes for the hotel rooms. The rooms typically should have, a very nice high thread count on their beds. They typically have nice restrooms. The bathrooms are typically supposed to be immaculate. Really nice places for, baths, or they have really, really brilliant stand-up showers. You're paying for the luxury of it. Obviously, there are some budget properties on the Strip. You have places like Excalibur, Luxor, Harrah's, Link, that are not going to have some of these qualities because they are older properties. But you know that because in the price, that's where it differs. You just have to know that going into it. But other than that, because it's very important, they also have very high caliber restaurants on the Las Vegas Strip. And again, downtown as well. I kind of lumped these together, but we're really focusing on the Strip here. So high caliber restaurants. So the difference is really in terms of cuisine between the Strip and local casinos. Local casinos tend to have one really good restaurant and then like 5 other like mediocre restaurants. A Strip property tends to have, let's just say 10 restaurants on the entire property, and like 7 of them are very high quality, celebrity chef, that kind of deal. You're paying to have that level of service and also level of product in the hotel. For a really good example is like Caesar's Palace. Caesar's Palace has Peter Luger's. They have 2 Bobby Flay restaurants. They have a Hell's Kitchen. They also have a pub and grill that's done by Gordon Ramsay. They have a water grill, which is inside of the mall. They have Vanderplump's, which is a very nice, lounge, cocktail lounge kind of deal. And of course, they have their food hall, which is important. They have their buffet. These are everything that I've mentioned. Really high execution. They have a Mr. Chow's. They have a Nobu. Those are all name brands. So that is really what you're getting when you stay on the Strip. Is it expensive? 100%. Usually for, let's just say, dinner, I would say you would expect for 2 people that you're coming out $250, $300, which is a lot. But that's typically what you're looking at when you're going to dine at these restaurants. A really good way to cut down on that bill is to do lots of sharing plates and doing like a steak and sharing it and getting lots of sides, or getting an entree and a steak. 2 steaks is going to set you back, 75, let's just say $80 a steak. That's being generous. $80, you're at $160, and you haven't even ordered your sides or your appetizers yet. So sharing, huge deal. But again, you get a very high caliber of restaurant inside of a Strip property. I'll even mention like MGM Grand. MGM Grand, which is a huge property, over 5,000 rooms. They have one of the only 3 Michelin star restaurants on the Las Vegas Strip. They have Robuchon, or Joe Robuchon, which is the name of the chef that created that restaurant. He has now passed away. But Joe Robuchon, 3 Michelin stars. They go for about, $400, $500 a seating. They also have a Wolfgang Puck bar and grill in there. They have a Morimoto, which is after Chef Morimoto. They have a craft steak. They have Lucchini, which is an Italian restaurant, pretty casual. They also have, I believe, a Jonas Brothers restaurant in there as well. That one's more of a celebrity endorsement deal. But many, many restaurants in these properties, and you get the point. So lots of high caliber restaurants on the Strip. Are there affordable places? Of course there are. You do have to do a little bit of, shopping around. One of my favorite sort of approachable places is over at the Park MGM, which great underrated property. Lots of really good restaurants in there, very diverse. But what I really like about them is that they have the Chef Truck, which has beautiful Cuban sandwiches. They also do a lot of stuff from the movie Chef, but highly recommend it, especially if you're looking for something on a budget, but really delicious, really flavorful. I also really enjoy, one of my favorite things of Gordon Ramsay's is Gordon Ramsay's Fish and Chips, which is located right next to the High Roller. And that is probably my favorite Gordon Ramsay restaurant. It's not even a restaurant. You stand up and eat it. favorite restaurant of all of his properties. It's just really highly executed fish and chips. You're running about $20 when you get into there, but that's really, really good. That's actually not a bad price for the amount of food you get and also the quality that you get out of those fish and chips. But again, high caliber of restaurants, a lot of celebrity chefs. Are they sometimes overblown? 100%, but that's the Strip. That's what you get. So typically higher minimums on the table games. It's very, very well known. It's getting more and more expensive, which is not nice. Typically, most table games for blackjack, you're looking things like you're looking at like $25 and up for blackjack, which is nobody likes that. But you're still able to find $15 blackjack at some places, like let's just say Excalibur, Luxor. You can find $15 sometimes at Link and Harrah's. You just really have to focus on where you're going to find these places. So, but typically minimums 25 and up. You can usually find $15 craps, which is what I really like to play. But again, if you're going to gamble, obviously be responsible. But typically the Strip is a really tough place to get a good value. So just know that it's going to be much harder for you to watch your budget when you're gambling on the Las Vegas Strip. So in that case, I would always recommend local casinos are good. Same thing with Fremont Street. You can usually find affordable gambling in those parts of Las Vegas. So moving through, they do have paid parking at Strip properties. So that's why I recommend if you're going to be on the Strip, not really a need to have a car. Of course, you could take Uber and Lyft a lot of places. Sometimes you can rent a car for just like one day and then return it. That's, for example, if you're wanting to go to places like Hoover Dam, or if you want to go to the Grand Canyon, rent it for a day or two, and then you have to pay for one night of parking, which is fine. But paid parking has gone up quite significantly. A lot of places charge $13, $14 after the first 3 hours, after the first hour, and then it goes on from there. So I believe Caesars right now is like one of the more expensive places to park on the Las Vegas Strip. I think it ends up being like $20 or $25 after like an hour. So again, keep that in mind. But moving on, after the paid parking, much more diverse arrangement of guests. So the reason I say this is sort of like to earlier what I said. I like meeting new people. You're going to meet unique, interesting people at any bar that you go to, as much or as little as you want to. You get really fun stories. You see a lot of fun things. And you're getting people who are on vacation. When you go to local places, people, it's their Friday night. It's not their vacation. So that's why I like going to the Strip, is because you get those really fun, unique stories. And of course, if I went to local places, I don't think you guys would enjoy a lot of the commentary that happens at local casinos. So I just love going to the Strip and sitting at a bar and just hearing people talk about how much better Miami is than Los Angeles, even though they're visiting. Or sorry, better than Las Vegas. So I don't know. It's just fun. So we also have shows on the Las Vegas Strip. They're not free, though, and like I said, with local properties. So the shows themselves on the Strip have gotten, pretty pricey. You can usually find pretty good deals for Cirque du Soleil now, just because we're now like sort of getting away from the Cirque du Soleil craze. So most Cirque du Soleils, you can find tickets in like the $75 to $80 range. Whenever we list something as $75, that is before taxes and fees, which if it's a, let's just say, $75 ticket, look to be spending at least $20 to $25 on taxes and fees. So you'd be looking at somewhere closer to like $95, almost $100 for a $75 ticket. But we have many shows on the Strip. One of my favorite is Vegas the Show, which it's a great production show for like the history of Las Vegas. Then you have places that are sort of the opposite spectrum that is, quite wacky and out there under the big top, which is Absinthe, which Absinthe is, it used to be a harder show to get into. It's still a little bit difficult, especially for a big party, but you can usually find tickets for it. Those tickets range starting about $110 all the way up to $250 per ticket, depending where you sit. So wonderful shows. They're always world class, but the big thing now, we're getting a lot of residencies, and I think that is the future of the entertainment biz in Las Vegas for a while, kind of going back to when Celine Dion was running the place. So walking distance for everything. I kind of ran through the Strip because you guys have heard me talk about the Strip and how much admiration I have for Las Vegas Boulevard. But really, it's picking out the property that's best for you. The Strip can handle children. I think we've become much more family friendly, in the past, 10 years, I would say, even though we try to get away from that. It just depends. I think there's a good balance for adult entertainment and family entertainment on the Las Vegas Strip. But the Strip, again, they typically will emphasize more restaurants. They'll also emphasize more gambling, spa. That's typically where you find world-class spas on the Las Vegas Strip. Local casinos will have spas, but not on the level that is the Las Vegas Strip. So, again, it just depends on what works best for you, but I just really wanted to highlight sort of the major differences of what you get inside of a property, because we hear local casinos, we hear, the Strip and local, and what is the difference. So hopefully this podcast sort of explained a little bit of that for you. And if you're deciding whether staying at a local property is better for you or the Strip property, I hope this was able to help you out a little bit. So make sure to check out our latest videos on Concierge Confidential _LV on Instagram, or my personal, which is Brian_Ortega26. You can also find us on TikTok, which is @Keys to Vegas. And also you can find us on, what else do we have? Twitter, which is @Keys to Vegas. Not tweeting very much lately. And also our YouTube channel, which is Concierge Confidential. So again, thank you so much, everybody, for listening to the episode. Really appreciate it. Keep sending those DMs of you're coming to Las Vegas and you need recommendations. I will do my best to get to all of them. But again, thank you so much for everybody's support. I really appreciate it. If you see me out in town, come say hello. But remember, keep it confidential.